Remember that amazing little cafe you discovered last summer? Or that perfect hiking spot you heard about? With the Overlook mobile app, you can create personalized lists of places you've been and want to go, and always see everything on a map. Share your favorite hidden gems with friends and family, or keep your secret spots private for you. The best part? No ads cluttering your lists, and no one selling your interests or travel data. Download the free app at overlookmaps.com and check out overlookmaps.com/Nashville to see some CityCast lists on a map and in your pocket. Overlookmaps.com. Collect and share the places that matter to you.
Today on CityCast Nashville, the Tennessee Valley Authority is the largest public utility in the country, providing energy for people in 7 states, including right here in Nashville. But President Trump is currently making moves to seize control of the TVA board and possibly privatize the company. So what would that do to our energy costs? Would local jobs be affected? And what does a country singer have to do with all of this? Justin Humbles, Vice President of Iron Workers Local 492, is here to explain. It's Tuesday, August 26th. I'm your executive producer, Whitney Pasterek, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Let's start with everyone's most burning question. Why is Nashville resident John Rich, former Celebrity Apprentice contestant and one half of country band Big and Rich, Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy, mad at the Tennessee Valley Authority, the nation's largest public utility?
Well, so to start, just to, I guess, give a little backstory here, throughout the Tennessee Valley, 7 states, potential sites for power plants are identified. And one of these potential sites was located in Cheatham County. And, the community launched a grassroots organizing campaign where, including John Rich, where they were unhappy for several reasons. John did reach out to the Trump administration, and ultimately, due to a variety of community concerns and, frankly, a lack of agreement from all parties, TVA announced the cancellation of that combined cycle power plant.
So the power plant is now not coming to the Ashland City area, which I think residents are thrilled about. They will be putting it someplace else. What I'm curious about here, though, is John Rich's relationship with Donald Trump. I mentioned that he had been on Celebrity Apprentice. They're friends in real life, right?
That's my understanding. It appears so because, it seems the Trump administration did acknowledge his request to support, not moving forward with that project. So I'd say that he certainly has a line.
And now, because of this flap of John Rich's butterfly wings, President Trump is suddenly talking about privatizing or seizing control of TVA.
So, Whitney, when we look back in history, this is not the first time that TVA has experienced any kind of pressure or speculation surrounding potential privatization from an administration, including the first Trump administration. And, historically, bipartisan efforts have always prevailed, including our own Senator Lamar Alexander coming out one time in strong support of non-privatization.
Okay, so let's back up a bit. For our listeners at home who might not know, the TVA is the nation's oldest and largest public utility. It was founded by FDR as part of the New Deal, and it provides electricity to more than 10 million people across 7 states. Who uses their electricity here in Middle Tennessee?
153 power purchasers, local power companies actually purchase from the TVA. That's a lot of power purchasers, and it's brought to us at a more affordable rate than 70% of other areas in this country get to experience.
So if I'm paying NES, I'm paying NES to get power from TVA that NES buys?
100%. Yep. NES is one of the 153 identified local power companies, as well as the more rural cooperatives and whatnot that exist here in the state and throughout the valley.
And Justin, I guess we should get this out of the way too. How are you connected to all of this? What makes you such an expert in how TVA works?
So I am a union representative for Iron Workers Local 492 and a delegate to the Nashville Building Trades, throughout the years, actually working on various Tennessee Valley projects or working in my current capacity, I've been in and around, and our organization has proudly partnered with TVA for years. In fact, 4 generations of my family have worked on various projects.
Can you give us an example of what you did on a project? I'm now picturing you with like a welding torch.
Yeah, so Tennessee Valley Authority, we had a project out there in New Johnsonville, and I was privileged. I was honored to be able to work on that project, building a new powerhouse out that ways to supply power to our more rural communities. But then also, it's can't be stated enough the economic development stuff that goes on with our industrial parks and providing power and for our community partners.
All right, so let's talk worst case scenario then. What happens if TVA gets privatized or President Trump seizes control over it? What would be the consequences of that? What would be the pluses of that? And how would that even work?
I'll tell you, essentially, the administration's currently attempting to seize control as we speak, in our eyes. A 9-person board currently only has 3 sitting members remaining after several firing without causes. The administration's now nominated 5 with little to no energy industry experience as replacements for those so that they can regain a quorum. These nominations will have to go in front of the Senate for our United States Senate for confirmation. But essentially, should these 5 Trump nominated board members be confirmed, he would essentially have control of the board.
Well, you've been in and out of TVA board and committee meetings all week. What are the latest updates and what are you hearing on the ground?
To be honest, it was fantastic to see the energy at the listening session that they held on Wednesday. Environmental groups, labor leaders, even Tennessee farmers were coming out in force, just making sure that, while they did express their appreciation that Cheatham County, that project was canceled. And obviously there's always room for improvement in an organization. By and large, overwhelming support from all organizations represented. And it was a fantastic experience. The day after, there was a board meeting with the 3 remaining directors and CEO Don Mall. And, they spoke to various capital investments that were already on the books and that they look forward to being able to carry out here in the Valley. But again, very little business they can do without a quorum.
The biggest message that I've heard from people who are opposing this takeover or privatization of TVA is that everyday people's power bills are going to go up. Would you agree with that assessment?
Absolutely. The nation's largest public power provider, and they're 100% self-sufficient, right? They've received no federal appropriations. They operate on a budget from the Jimmy Carter days, the debt ceiling from the Jimmy Carter days, 1979. It's been no increases since that. But I will say they're able to offer us rates, residential rates, 70% lower than anywhere else in the nation. And, they also provide that affordable power that draws so many industries to Tennessee and elsewhere in the Valley.
So NES would have to pay more to get their power, and then NES would pass those charges on to consumers here in Nashville.
Absolutely. Even if people can't see the good that TVA does in the community or think that it's just for the rural environment, even the Metro Nashvilleian will experience a hike in rates.
We reached out to the Tennessee Valley Authority to get their response to a lot of the questions we're asking in this episode. And so I reached out and said, how much do you estimate electricity costs would go up for private citizens in the Nashville area in the event that TVA is privatized? And through a spokesperson, they said, we can't speculate on a proposal we haven't seen, but we can tell you that TVA's public power model means we aren't driven by profits or shareholders. It helps us attract jobs and economic investment and offers our customers some of the lowest electricity rates in the country. TVA has proven that public power works. What's an example of a state with a private electricity company?
When we look at comparisons, for-profit organizations, private power providers, the easiest ones that come to mind are probably Duke Energy or Southern Company. Both are for-profit and can't stress enough that, TVA as an agency is also highly invested in that responsible stewardship of the land and giving back to our community, partnering with registered apprenticeships, organizations like the FFA, their mission statement says it best: to serve and make life better for the people of the Valley region. I don't think we'll be able to find that anywhere in the Duke Energy mission statement.
Well, I'm glad you just mentioned environmental stewardship, because the Sierra Club is also opposing this move, saying that it would hand over dams, parks, lakes, trails, and other recreational areas to this potentially private company. What's the significance of that?
I would 100% agree with the Sierra Club on that stance. I believe the absence of TVA would leave a serious vacuum for the Valley with land management. TVA constantly strives to be good stewards of the land, creating free opportunities for families to enjoy our beautiful Valley. Again, I'm not sure who would be able to take that on and at what cost to Valley residents.
I asked TVA how their land management and flood control work around the Nashville area specifically would be impacted in the event of privatization. They responded, TVA's management of public lands and waters supports $12 billion in economic activity a year and over 130,500 jobs. We'll also note that flood control in Nashville on the Cumberland River is managed by the U.S. Army Corps, not TVA. And they said that includes the reservoirs and surrounding lands like Percy Priest and Dale Hollow. How many people does TVA employ locally here in Nashville, or even let's expand it to the Middle Tennessee region and include Clarksville and sort of everyone around us? And that can be both from a utility perspective or a land management perspective.
So TVA employs thousands throughout the Valley, directly and indirectly, on construction, production, maintenance, various projects. Just here in Middle Tennessee, the ones that easily come to mind: Gallatin, Cumberland City, New Johnsonville. On the construction side and on the maintenance projects, TVA partners with unions and registered apprenticeships to source the labor for these projects, providing that much more opportunity for our homegrown folks to get out there.
Why would any of those jobs go away if President Trump seized control of TVA?
Yeah, so the privatization, big business piece, a lot of this labor could be outsourced for a workforce coming from out of state. Potentially projects are canceled here in the Valley and moved elsewhere. Kind of like we saw with the New Deal, this organization, this agency was created to uplift our community here in Tennessee and to provide those opportunities, specifically for the Valley. And that's been huge in driving industry and training a workforce that can live, work, and retire in dignity.
You mentioned apprenticeships earlier, which is something that always makes me think of the Sorcerer's Apprentice and Mickey Mouse, but no, it's a very important step in someone's growth in the trades. Talk about your experience with those programs and why TVA is necessary for those opportunities to exist.
Just from a building trades perspective, we have 14 affiliate unions that are a part of an organization, and each operates an apprenticeship to help facilitate the training on the job and in a classroom setting to make sure that our folks are qualified to be able to work safely and then also produce quality work. This same training is offered at zero cost to the apprentice, and they're, again, paid a good wage and benefits from day one. It's very different than the workforce that could potentially come from out of town, where not only do we not have homegrown labor on the job, but we're also not training up the next generation of skilled workforce.
Do private companies not have apprenticeship programs?
So the way that our apprenticeship programs will work, everyone's a little different as far as timeline based on what kind of craft you're in. But essentially, we're all registered through the Department of Labor, and there's oversight there to ensure that not only, are you getting set amount of work hours on the job, but in addition to that, that your curriculum meets standards. So there are apprenticeships that exist sometimes in that open shop non-union world, but it's very rare that they actually uphold the standards enough to qualify for a registered apprenticeship through the DOL.
Tennessee is a right to work state. Justin, what does that mean?
So right to work is essentially big business's opportunity to exclude the power of unions in the workplace. We're all membership organizations that pay dues to be a part of something bigger. There's been some rhetoric in the past, but essentially we're just working class folks just trying to stand together to ensure that our men and women receive the training we need, the good job site conditions to keep us safe and keep us going home to our families each and every day. And again, the pay benefits to make sure that we can live and work and retire in dignity.
Unions do have their detractors, though, including my father, who spent 50 years in a union and upon retirement declared that they'd never done a damn thing for him. And obviously, the majority of our state leaders are not big fans. So what's your response to people, and even maybe some of our listeners who are hearing your words right now and they believe that unions use scare tactics and that the kinds of regulations that are spurred by the labor movement are bad for business growth?
So frankly, Whitney, I'd say it like my grandfather says it. Any organization that has a union has at one time deserved it. And unions exist so that, the people have the opportunity to stand together and their voice can be heard to ensure that, again, these conditions, these measures that have been put in place are maintained for our memberships. The scare tactics, as an organizer for the union, I can tell you that it's simply an educational experience is what we're trying to do as we speak to folks and help them decide whether they'd like to form a union or not. But on the other side of that aisle, there's an entire industry that operates around union busting, around trying to potentially retaliate upon anyone that would try to form a union or spread false propaganda. We're not fat cats living it up. We're just working class folks that we're just trying to get a good livable wage and benefits.
I did ask TVA for their take on what role union labor currently plays in their operations in Middle Tennessee and beyond. They wrote, "Our union workforce is the backbone of TVA's success. Union representatives make up a majority of the workforce at our generating sites, including our Cumberland fossil plant and Gallatin fossil plant in Middle Tennessee. Union contractors are also vital to keeping our facilities in operation, particularly during maintenance outages when hundreds of temporary union workers perform vital activities at each of our sites." Can I ask you to take your union leader hat off for a second?
Sure.
All right. Is there any way, in your expert opinion, that privatizing TVA could lead to more good-paying jobs here in Nashville instead of fewer?
I struggled to see any opportunities there that present themselves as a pro and not a con. For 92 years now, I believe, TVA has provided those jobs here in the community and proven themselves to be a partner. I don't see how rate hikes, I don't see how the potential to bring in an out-of-state workforce or one that doesn't partner with registered apprenticeships, I don't see how any of that could be pro for our state and for the Valley.
So as you mentioned at the top of this conversation, TVA has been a target for decades. This is nothing new. In fact, when President Obama was in office, he too floated the idea to, quote, reform TVA due to the fact that their debt obligation was too high. Were people this upset when he suggested it?
Yes, Whitney, absolutely. So people were pretty upset, and I'll say this, it was a very brief piece of the conversation when President Obama brought it up in 2012. It was simply surrounding the budget, but by no means do I think President Obama was seriously floating the idea. But even then, just the mention during the budget conversation, strong bipartisan support, including, I think I mentioned earlier in the conversation, our very own Senator Lamar Alexander standing up to preach the good about TVA and why not to privatize.
We went back and did a little bit of research around that period, too, and found a story in The Atlantic in 2013. They noted there that it's also not clear private entities would even want to step up and assume control of this whole thing. Is it possible that it's simply too large to be privatized?
They are a large organization that do so much that I do believe it'd be difficult for somebody to take on them as a whole. I know there's been some speculation potentially around if it were to be privatized, certain divisions or assets being sold off piecemeal, which I believe is pretty dangerous too. The coordination provided by one entity, the TVA, for the people, it'd be difficult to do without, that level of oversight.
We've talked a lot during this conversation about workers and a living wage and ensuring a good quality of life for your union members' families. It feels like there are an awful lot of costs currently being passed on to the American people, whether that's the increase in healthcare that's anticipated with the dismantling of Medicaid, or tariffs being passed down, or SNAP and EBT cuts coming from the federal government. How are your workers doing right now, and could they absorb an additional added cost?
Whitney, our workers, and I believe the working class, middle class Tennessean or American right now, is having to find new ways to make the dollar go further. And, in this climate, absorbing yet another cost to our middle and working class families, that's just not something I can see that we could stomach. Again, getting creative, stretching that dollar a little further. It's like peanut butter over too much bread. I mean, it's just at some point, if it doesn't bend, it breaks.
Okay, well, I think we've established who, in your opinion, loses when public goods become private products. Who benefits when public goods become private products?
Honestly, big business. It's the shareholders. The wonderful thing about, say, for instance, TVA, there's no shareholders. There's no maximizing those profits for corporate good, for corporate greed. This is simply, an organization that's out there trying to do something affordable, succeeding at doing that, but then also so much good back in our community with land management, with the flood control, and everything else they do for us.
Well, and just to sum it all up, I asked TVA for their response in general to this potential takeover, and they said, quote, TVA has been around for more than 90 years through a world war, economic instability, and decades of change. Then and now, we continue to focus on our core mission of producing power, growing the region's economy, and environmental stewardship. And then they also sent along this quote from Don Mall, the TVA president and CEO, who you mentioned earlier, Justin, from that board meeting that was held on August 21st. He said, "Public power is one of America's greatest strengths because it puts people first, not profits. The model that has worked for the Tennessee Valley region and this country for decades is building with a sense of urgency, building for safety, building with expertise, building as part of a long-range plan, and building assets to operate decade after decade. That's our public power model. Those are our public power partnerships. That's what aligns with our national, state, and local goals, as well as our economic needs." Well, Justin, thank you so much for your time today. I know that you are a busy man. In the meantime, if our listeners want to learn more about what's going on, understand more about how your union works and why you have taken this stance on the Tennessee Valley Authority's potential privatization, where can they go to learn more?
www.ironworkers492.org. They're more than welcome to check us out online and learn a little bit about us, give us a call. And we do work closely with our rural school systems, but then we're also here in Metro Nashville working with our apprenticeship readiness programs and whatnot here. So I would encourage anyone to come check us out and learn more about us.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Whitney.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. And hey, have you voted for us as Best Podcast in Best of Nashville yet? Do it right now. bestofnashville2025.com. Voting ends on Thursday. And don't forget, you can also support this show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Nashville neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends? Rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Y'all take care of each other.